Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, well, a really intense subject today. It caused quite an emotional tremor, I think, among many Catholics globally.
Definitely. We're looking at the fallout from that doctrinal note, Mater Populi Fidelis, issued by Cardinal Fernández and approved by Pope Leo XIV.
And the reaction wasn't just intense, it seemed rooted in, well, a lot of confusion, right?
Absolutely. If you follow Catholic news, the narrative that took hold almost immediately was that the Church had somehow rejected or even outright banned these really beloved Marian titles. We're talking specifically Mediatrix and Co-Redemptrix.
Yeah, if you were anywhere near Catholic media, you probably heard that pretty forcefully. You know, this idea that centuries of Marian devotion were just, poof, tossed aside.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really look at the source material. We've got texts from folks defending the titles too. We need to figure out, does that dramatic narrative actually hold water?
Or are we dealing with maybe a huge misinterpretation of what's actually quite a nuanced document?
I think it's definitely the latter. The core problem seems to be separating that instant media reaction from what the doctrinal note actually says. Our analysis, looking closely, shows that this idea of rejection or cancellation, it's really far from the truth.
We have to look at what it commands, not what people said it commands.
Exactly. And you really saw this tension flare up in places where these titles are just central to local faith.
Like the Philippines, right? With Our Lady, Mediatrix of all grace.
Precisely. Their devotion is so deep, so historic. So imagine reading headlines suggesting the Vatican might be suppressing that cherished title. It caused immediate distress, a feeling of being criticized, maybe even pushed aside.
That's understandable. That visceral reaction is important context.
It really is. But then you move past the headlines, you actually read the text, and the word forbid. It's just not there. Does it express caution? Yes, definitely, especially around Co-Redemptrix. But the language consistently asks for careful use, for proper theological context. It's not demanding abandonment.
And if we look at Cardinal Fernández's own words about why he issued it, the idea of suppression kind of falls apart, doesn't it?
It really does. He stated very clearly that the note aims to, and I'm quoting loosely here, accompany and sustain the love of Mary and trust in her maternal intercession. He even added it was rather than proposing limits.
Okay, so not punitive, not meant to shut things down.
Not at all. The core function seems to be catechesis, guidance.
So nurture, purify, guide the devotion, keep it focused.
Exactly. Make sure it stays Christ-centered and rooted in authentic Catholic faith. That seems to be the main concern. Encourage love for Mary, yes, but always ensuring Jesus Christ is the sole focus, the ultimate source of grace.
So the headlines might scream ban, but the document itself is more like a whisper of guide and clarify.
That's a good way to put it.
But, you know, the sources we looked at, some defending the titles, they raise an interesting counterpoint. They suggest maybe this note, despite the Cardinal's stated intent, feels a bit influenced by other pressures.
Like ecumenical or political factors.
Yeah, maybe a push to simplify things for dialogue with non-Catholics, possibly sidelining centuries of really deep theological reflection, that this guidance could feel like suppression to those deeply invested in the tradition.
That's a really important tension, isn't it? If the official goal is guidance, but the effect on some faithful, or how critics frame it, is suppression because of that wider context.
Right.
Well, how do you navigate that?
Right. It makes the whole situation very complex.
It does. That gap between internal doctrinal aim and external factors is key.
And if the intention was just guidance, that really brings up the question of the document's power. What kind of authority does a doctrinal note actually have?
Okay, good question. If the goal had been a permanent, definitive rejection of these titles,
Yeah, what would that have taken?
you'd need something much weightier, a mechanism with far greater authority. We're talking documents directly from the Pope, like a motu proprio, or even more definitively, an official change to the Catechism of the Catholic Church itself.
Those are the big guns, doctrinally speaking.
Exactly. Those are tools for fundamental, universal change.
We should probably clarify that for listeners. When we talk about those high-level definitive changes, what are some examples?
Well, think about Pope Francis declaring the death penalty inadmissible. That required actually changing the catechism text. That's huge.
Okay.
Or, going back a bit, Pope Benedict XVI confirming that the theological idea of limbo for unbaptized infants does not exist.
Right.
Those kinds of definitive statements closing big theological questions need that top-tier, extraordinary magisterial authority.
So a doctrinal note like Mater Populi Fidelis, it's
Right.
not playing in that league.
Not even close. It belongs to what we call the ordinary magisterium.
Which is?
That's the church's regular day-to-day teaching authority. It's not infallible. Its job is usually to clarify, explain, or guide existing teaching, often in response to current issues or confusion.
So it doesn't define new dogma. That's the job of the extraordinary magisterium, like with the Immaculate Conception or the Assumption dogmas.
Precisely. That's a vital distinction.
So given that level of authority, what's the expected response from Catholics? It's not like you're a heretic if you question it, right?
No, not at all. The term used is religious submission of intellect and will.
Okay. What does that mean in practice?
It's profound, actually. It means you sincerely accept the teaching, respecting its source and purpose, as long as it doesn't contradict sacred scripture and tradition.
So there's a check.
Yes. And crucially, the defenders of the titles emphasize this. The note clarifies usage, explains existing teaching. It doesn't try to rewrite or change established doctrine. If it did, then the faithful would have a duty to assess its faithfulness to tradition.
That's a tension, isn't it? Showing that religious submission while knowing it's not infallible.
Exactly.
But this is where, for me, it gets really interesting, because the biggest piece of evidence that Mediatrix hasn't been canceled, it's right there in the Catechism, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The Catechism is the gold standard, right? And the relevant parts are completely untouched.
If they'd wanted to definitively reject Mediatrix, paragraph 969 would have had to go, or be seriously rewritten.
Without a doubt. But it stands, and it affirms Mary's ongoing role.
What does 969 say specifically about her mission now in heaven?
It paints this beautiful picture. It says she did not lay aside the saving office, but by her manifold intercession continues to bring us the gifts of eternal salvation. Her job as mother and intercessor continues. That's the foundation for these titles.
And the titles themselves, does the Catechism list them?
Yes, explicitly. So because of this ongoing role, the Blessed Virgin is invoked in the Church under the titles of Advocate, Helper, Benefactress, and Mediatrix.
Mediatrix, right there.
In black and white.
Right there. Its continued presence in the Church's official universal teaching text is, frankly, definitive proof. The title is recognized, it's integrated. The note is just about clarifying how we use it, not denying its existence. Okay, that feels pretty conclusive on the ban question. So let's get into the heart of that clarification, the theological guidance itself. This is where the nuance really comes in, especially around the words grace versus graces.
Yes, this distinction seems subtle, almost like splitting hairs, but it's theologically critical to what the note is doing.
How so?
Paragraphs 67 and 68 really tackle this. The note shows caution about the plural form, mediatrix of all graces, especially if used carelessly.
And the danger of using the plural graces without care? What's the theological risk?
The risk is implying Mary distributes graces, kind of, independently, like she has her own stash of assorted blessings to hand out.
Potentially separating her action from Christ, the source.
Exactly. It could subtly diminish or obscure the absolute uniqueness and sufficiency of Christ as the one source of all saving grace. It might muddy the waters about whether Mary participates in the actual work of redemption itself.
And that connects back to the caution around Co-Redemptrix, doesn't it? That title raises similar flags.
It does. The note is very cautious there. Again, not banning it, but cautious, because Co-Redemptrix could be misunderstood to mean Mary accomplished our redemption alongside Christ, rather than her role being about interceding for the graces that flow from his completed work. The focus always has to circle back to Christ's unique role.
Okay, so if the plural graces gets the cautious eye, how does the note balance that? And why is the singular grace okay?
Paragraph 68 provides that balance. It acknowledges the plural graces is fine in a devotional sense, like when we're just talking about the many specific favors or blessings God grants through Mary's intercession.
Like answered prayers, specific help.
Right. But the singular form, mediatrix of all grace, which, as you noted, is central to the Lipa devotion in the Philippines that form, captures the deeper theological truth perfectly.
How so?
The singular grace points directly to the one saving grace of Jesus Christ. Every blessing ultimately flows from that single source.
So invoking her as mediatrix of all grace affirms that her power to intercede comes entirely from her Son, the sole mediator and redeemer.
Precisely. It keeps the devotion beautifully Christ-centered. The note actually supports this understanding. So clarifying that distinction is a really helpful takeaway for people.
That really clarifies things. So summing up the effect of Mater Populi Fidelis, it seems it actually supports continued devotion to Mary as mediatrix.
It does. But it insists on, let's say, prudence and proper catechesis, using the language carefully. It definitely doesn't deny or throw out Mary's essential role as intercessor.
And we need to remember the history here, too, right? These titles weren't handed down like the creed.
Exactly. There were always theological reflections, devotional titles that grew over centuries of piety and prayer. They aren't dogmas defined from the start.
Which gives the current magisterium, the Pope and bishops teaching today, the authority to guide how they're used, to clarify things.
Yes, they have that authority. But, as we saw with the Catechism remaining unchanged, that authority doesn't just erase centuries of prayer and miracles and deep devotion tied to these titles.
So, what does this all mean for you listening to this? I think the big insight is learning to separate the media hype from the actual doctrinal reality.
Yeah, and understanding the different levels of church teaching. A doctrinal note clarifying things is important, but it's not the same as the Catechism defining established dogma.
Right. They have different weights.
Which leaves us with a fascinating core conflict, doesn't it? Building on that tension we talked about earlier.
What's that?
Well, how should you, as one of the faithful, navigate this? How do you balance respecting centuries of cherished theological reflection, often championed by saints and great thinkers of the past,
with sincerely trying to follow that call for religious submission to the guidance being given by the Church's teachers today?
Exactly. That delicate balance honoring tradition while submitting to current guidance, that's really the challenge, isn't it?
It certainly is. Definitely something to think about as you continue your own deep dive into the life and language of the Church.